Okay. So this is kind of take one of my first public speaking engagement. So who influenced me most? If I look at my life, look at people who influenced me, who really moved me to change. Of course, since I'm a Christian, Jesus, the Lord, speaking to me through His people, through His book, through my relationship with Him, clearly is first and foremost who's changed me. But how'd I get there? I mean, the most influential people would have been the ones who got me to Christ, right? Well, if I think back, as I think back to my, to my early 20s, kind of the time in my life which was really decisive in where I was going to go at that point, in which direction I was going to head. At that time, I was really kind of I wanted to be really kind of a social activist. I wanted to be somebody that affected good in the world. I wanted to be part of the groups that were doing important things. I think about, how I wanted to be part of the revolutionary kind of movements at the time. I wanted to be in the marches in Washington, D.C., against the Iraq War. And I wanted to be on those ships that were going after the whalers, the Greenpeace guys. I really admired the people that were getting out of their comfort zones and doing those things. And naturally what happened is I was attracted to wanting to learn about the people who affected, social change, good change, the way I saw, like the most important change. I wanted to know who those people were and how they did it and how they thought. Naturally, I was drawn to learn more about Martin Luther King, right? The biggest change, biggest movement, biggest social justice movement in the 20th century. One that kind of spread around the world, and has started a conversation and a movement around the world which kind of tore down those established ways of doing things, with white people on top and everybody else underneath. So I started looking at Martin Luther King. I started reading his speeches, and his letters, and immediately I saw somebody that wasn't so much a social activist. Like that wasn't the foundation of who he was. That wasn't why he was doing what he was doing. Every movement, right, has an idea, a foundational idea. And I want to know what was King's. Well, King's foundation of who he was he was a Christian. He was a follower of Christ. And the God that he knew, the God that he preached, the God that he learned about in his family and growing up in the church, was a God where all people, all of God's children, as he would often say, are equal before the Lord. So his movement to bring equality and justice and social justice and opportunity, equal opportunity to all people, this was a movement that came out of the truth that he held to. It was about everybody. It was about God, first and foremost. And this got me curious, right? Because when you grow up, in the public school system, what you know about Martin Luther King is the extent of, the March on Washington. You know about the March on Washington. You know about the I Have a Dream speech. You might know about, the Civil Rights Bill, the Voting Rights Act, and these measures. You might learn about affirmative action, but you don't learn about in school is that God was the center of King's civil rights movement. They don't teach you that. So I was compelled to learn about this Jesus that was at the center of this man's philosophy that changed the world. Right? Now, something I might add is that at this time I didn't know anything about Christianity, really. I didn't grow up in the church. I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know Jesus. I knew cultural Christianity. I knew the cross. I knew Easter, it was a celebration of this supposed resurrection. I knew, Christmas was a celebration of the birth of this man. But I didn't know anything about who this man was. In my head, it was just kind of an archaic sort of religion, full of myth, and it didn't have any relevance. It didn't have any real value. Right? Well, encountering King pointed me to Christ. That's who he was. That's what his movement was. He was pointing people to the truth of the Lord, and how the true inherent value of any person is found there. For King, that was the truth. For the value of a person was not in the color of their skin. It was in, the fact that they were created by God. Right? And that God saw all people as being equal. And the same went for, equal justice before the law. It all came from that we are equal before God's law, right? So it's encountering this God of the Bible in the context of the civil rights movement, changed my idea about what it was that actually imparts human dignity, right? It's not our opinions. It's not the movements we get behind, right? It's not what we say or what we push hardest for or who screams the loudest. None of that mattered. This was a total revolution of thought for me, because prior to this, the idea was that humans are inherently good, and you get behind those movements that that stress and communicate the goodness of who we are the most, and try to affect the world to encourage the natural, goodness of humanity. The goodness that King wanted people to recognize was not the goodness within us so much as the goodness of the God who created us, and how if we follow him, that will take us down the right road. That will take us down the road towards peace and equality and justice, and that was compelling. That was compelling to me. This idea that objectively we have value apart from what we even think, apart from our opinions, apart from how we feel. This is a very new idea to me. Now the Lord, how did the Lord respond to this? How did they connect? How does my recognition of King's philosophy, right, on the one hand, and my appreciation of it, and my reading of the scriptures, and my encounter with Jesus, how does that actually get me to God? Well, you can't come to the Lord by agreeing with him. It doesn't work that way. And I didn't become a Christian because I understood King's philosophy, right? I became a Christian because the Lord used King for me to be able to hear the truth of Christianity for the first time, and then the Lord began placing Christians in my life, which I would have conversations with, would help to clarify what the Bible was, and I started reading the Bible. And I today, I believe the same thing Martin Luther King did. I haven't stopped wanting good in the world, but I understand that it's not men and our ideas independent of God that bring any change about. It's men who are aligned with what God communicates to us, and men who understand who God is and who want to glorify him in the world and communicate that the Lord not only gives value to all of humanity, but is the most valuable thing in all of creation. So, King helped me to realize that it's not men who change the world. It's the Lord who changes the world, and he uses men to do it. King moved the people who shared his vision to resist and to speak out peaceably and patiently, and they changed the world in bigger ways than anyone could have imagined. King did it in the name of Jesus by pointing the world to Jesus. And for some reason, history has wanted to shut the door on that. They want to revere the man and forget about the God that inspired him, that moved him, that he proclaimed and professed and preached. It's amazing that the world has been able to do it. There's not a single child in the United States who doesn't learn about Martin Luther King. There's a national holiday for the man. We separate the man from who he was, really. I mean, because the Lord was the biggest part of who he was, and we try to take him out of that. And by doing so, we turn him into a myth and a legend. And he's not, we don't know the person he actually was. And we get away from the emphasis behind the civil rights movement. We don't even understand it. We have people wanting to replicate it, wanting to, be inspired by it, like myself. I was inspired by it, and really I didn't know what it was about at all. King knew that Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." King could walk down the street with bricks being thrown at his head and rifles being aimed at him, and not be shaken, because he knew, he was confident, and he knew that he was doing the work of God, right? Because he was proclaiming what was true. He was a prophet. He was saying to the world, God says, your systems, your society, your institutions are against me. And not only was he able to face a world, a country that in large part was against him, courageously and fearlessly and steadfastly, but he inspired other people to do the exact same thing. And he inspired them because he pointed them to Jesus. He said, you don't need to fight because your God didn't need to fight to change the world. How do we forget? How do we forget that? How do we forget that that's who he was, that that's what the movement was about, that that's the people that were walking and marching and sacrificing for my generation? How do we forget that? But we in the church should not forget that. Because we don't set a very good example for that legacy. We are a fearful and quiet and comfortable people most of the time. And we're not living out King's dream of little white boys and little black girls coming together in friendship and family and community. You know, the schools have integrated. Society has made progress. But we're not going to church together. My daughter isn't going to church in a church that represents the people that live in her neighborhood. Unfortunately. We need to remember and we need to feel the weightiness of our responsibility as Christians to continue what has been started, and not only to continue it, but accomplish the work. King stood at the mountaintop, and we're still fighting to gain the promised land. We're not done.